And we're rolling.
Hello, my name is Jackie Garringer McDermott, and we are recording live from the English Valleys History Center in North English, Iowa. It is February 1st, 2025. This diary or journal was written by my great-great-aunt, Mary Elizabeth Claypool Wade, who was known as Libby Wade. Here's a picture of Libby with her granddaughters. This is Hazel Cobb, Evelyn Kurtz, and Belva Yoss, her granddaughters, with her in the picture. Libby was my grandmother's aunt and the matriarch of our very, very large family. Libby lived a half a block east of Main Street in a little house on Oak Street in North English, Iowa until near the end of her life in 1959. She was 71 years old in 1946. I don't remember her, but she knew me as a baby. Downtown North English was also the center of my life as I grew up. I would like to introduce you page by page to the cast of characters from North English, Iowa and the surrounding English Valleys area. May 16th, 1946. Cool again. Mr. Warner brought Russell's check. Mrs. Bursler here. Jenny here and said they got Harold's sea bag yesterday. Russell went away in the PM, and I went up to see Ina. It is her 86th birthday. Bought a wash boiler at Evans's, $3.15. Ralph spaded the garden. Libby's son, Russell, who lives with her, has been sick this week. So his boss, Ellison Barnes, or E.B. Warner, from the North English Lumber Company, brought his check to him. Mrs. Bursler was her friend. She calls her Mrs. Bursler because she is a relatively new friend. Jenny is her daughter-in-law, the wife of oldest son Wayne or Perky Wade. Harold is her grandson on the right here, Harold Wade, and with his brother with his brother Bud in this picture. Stubb is stationed in the Navy on the West Coast. His duffel bag, or sea bag as sailors call it, has made it home before him. Ina that she went to see was Ina Bell McKinstry Claypool. She was 86 years old and the widow of Libby's older cousin, William Wallace Claypool, who was called Wallace Claypool. And Wallace has been gone since 1935. Wallace and Ina were the parents of Bert Harlan Claypool, Millard Fillmore Claypool, and Reverend Clarence Claypool. Ina Bell was also the sister-in-law of Libby's buddy, Bertie McKinstry. The wash boiler that she bought looks like this. Although Libby has a new washing machine, she will still need a tub to rinse the clothes before putting them through the wringer. Evans Hardware uptown was run by the Evans family. They were the grandparents of Bob Evans. We will have a feature story on the Evans family this spring. And Ralph Bursler, who's doing the work for her, was in high school, and his picture is right here. He's on this side of the picture. We'll come back to this class picture in another day. May 17th, 1946. Russell is some better. Went up to the lumber yard. Mrs. Bursler helped me plant dahlias and glads. Began raining about the time we finished. It's quite cold yet. Wayne's had a letter from Harold. Will be home soon. Someone made a mistake on his papers. Said report for duty instead of expiration of duty. I would guess that Libby was very happy to have some help to get her dahlia and gladiolus plants in the ground. May 18th, 1946. Temperature at noon was 44 degrees at Des Moines. Foggy. National Railroad strike is in effect since yesterday p.m. Ressie was here, and also Jenny. Belva is miserable. Mary R. here in the p.m., also Maud and Bertha. Hazel was here in the evening and said Belva's baby boy was born at 9 p.m., about 7 pounds, is a boy. Ressie that she's talking about was Ressie Wilkinson. She's an old family friend from the Yankee Point area who also lives in town now. Jenny's daughter Belva Yoss is miserable because she was expecting a baby any time. Mary Wade Regseger, who's this one on this side. And Maud Foster Claypool. And Bertha Garringer. We're family friends. Family and or friends who are likely sewing or doing needlework or visiting with Libby. Libby's young married granddaughter, Hazel Cobb, came to tell Grandma Libby that her nephew and Libby's first great-grandson had been born at 9 p.m. May 19th, 1946, cold and rainy. Russell went to the river, got some fish, and also got stuck and borrowed a tractor. Lena and Warren were here. Yesterday was skip day at school. Russell went to Mary R's and got strawberry plants and set them out. Russell was an avid fisherman, so a little rain was not going to bother him. After he got stuck, someone loaned him a tractor to pull out his car. Lena and Warren, was Libby's second son, have a teenage daughter named Phyllis, and this is Phyllis right here in this picture, on this side, at the top. And we're going to have more about this ball picture later too. Libby will have strawberries growing in her garden. May 20th, 1946. I washed, then went down to Wayne's to see the baby. They named him Michael David, or Mickey for short. He was born at 8:15 Saturday evening and weighed 7 pounds. Mrs. Cray was here. Heard late in the evening that Emma Rogers was dead. Cold and rain in the p.m. I put my flowers in. And the baby that was born is another member of the English Valley class of 1964, Mick Yoss. He's Libby's great-grandson. Mr. Gray that she was talking about is the father of Libby's son-in-law, Richard Cray. Emma Rogers was an old friend. Emma had been the oldest living graduate of Yankee Point School. She was almost 90 years old and had been born the 4th of July, 1856 in Iowa County as the daughter of a pioneer to this area, Daniel Welch, and his wife, Caroline Parker Welch. Emma Welch Rogers was a sister to Mary Welch Carter, the wife of William Starkweather Carter, Libby's old friend from Washington State, who had written Libby the mysterious letter a few months back. Here's a picture that was featured in the North English Record, along with a story about Yankee Point School, which I will share with you in a broadcast very soon. This is Emma Rogers on this side, and her daughter Florence and her son-in-law. You can't see it very well, but she was the one that passed away. May 21st, 1946. Sun is shining. Mr. Cray came over for his stove repairs. Brought us some asparagus. Got our oil barrel filled. I ironed and worked in the garden. Glenn G. and Maymie B. had a little auto accident. Fresh wild asparagus was a treat that I'm sure Libby was glad to receive. Glenn Garringer, that she's talking about, Glenn G., was my paternal uncle and Libby's great-nephew, who had arrived back in town from the Navy and is operating a service station uptown with his father, and he's dating Mamie Burkett. This is her. She's the high school senior that often stops to see Libby. May 22nd, 1946. Sunshiny but cold. Went to May breakfast at Lena's. 53 there besides the 7 helpers. Went over to see Lucy Phelps. Went to Mrs. Rogers' funeral in the p.m. Bob Garringer was here a while. Libby's daughter-in-law, Lena Wade, hosted a club breakfast for the WSCS, or Women's Christian Service Group, for 60 people. Lucy Phelps, that she went to see, was a friend, and Lucy had fallen and broken her hip and was confined to her home for many months. Emma Welch Rogers' funeral was today. And Bob Garringer that stopped to see her is this kid right here in this picture. That's my uncle and her great nephew. He was a grade school kid, and he likely stopped on the way home for a sweet treat or a cold drink. May 23rd, 1946. Bertha's 46th birthday. Rained nearly all day. Put out my geraniums that I had sent for. Was down to Wayne's a little while in the p.m. A little hail at night. Strong wind. Commencement at school. Libby's niece, my grandmother, Bertha Garringer, was born in 1900, so it was easy to figure out how old she was, so she was 46 in 1946. Although Libby probably kept a book with important birthdays in it. I have noticed that Libby often plants in her garden on rainy days. The attraction down at Wayne and Jenny's house a block away would be Libby's new great-grandson, Mickey Yoss, who was living there at the time. My future aunt, Maymie Garringer, was a member of the North English High School class of 1946. And also another person in that class was the grandson of Libby's friend, Bertie McKinstry, and his name was Keith, and he graduated tonight also. May 24th, 1946. Nationwide railroad strike. Cool. Ralph Bursler took off the storm windows. Mrs. Huff was here in the p.m. Last day of school. Truman speaks to the nation tonight on strikes. Here's a picture of Mrs. Alice Huff. She was a woman from town who was likely there to sow her visit. May 25th, 1946. Poppy Day. Temperature 48 degrees, rainy and cool. The railroad strike ended at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. President Truman speaks to Congress. Workers to get 18 cents per hour raise. May 26, 1946. Russell went fishing in the morning. In the afternoon, we went to the cemetery. Bertha and the little boys went along. Dean Claypool was here in the evening. Wayne's got word from Harold to meet him in CR. He's getting home today. Warmer today. Libby's son Russell drove Libby and her niece Bertha and the little boys, Chuck and Ronnie Garringer, to the Yankee Point Cemetery. I know Bertha never drove, and I assume Libby did not drive either. Women did not drive in those days. Some didn't. Libby's parents, Jonathan and Ann Mariah Claypool. Jonathan is the older gentleman in the picture, and Ann Mariah is his wife. And her brother, John Forsey Claypool, who's in the back on this side, were buried at Yankee Point Cemetery. And also her older brother, Arthur Benton Claypool. He's here, and his wife, Rosa. They're my great-grandparents. Dean Claypool, who visited in the evening, is Libby's nephew. He's the youngest son of Libby's brother, Verner Claypool, and his wife, Minnie Smart Claypool. In this picture here, Dean is the baby, right there. And in this picture, Dean is this guy. He's the youngest son of the Verner Claypools. Dean lived in North English and later married Darlene Vercondi's mother, Thelma Cobb Lown, after she was widowed. May 27th, 1946. Henry and Daisy's wedding anniversary. A real summer day. I washed and baked bread. Russell tied up the peonies this evening. We got a card from Anna saying that they would be here soon, to leave yesterday or today. Haven't seen Harold yet. Libby's older brother, Henry Claypool, and his wife, Daisy, that's these two right here in this picture. Libby's the young one in the middle of the picture. Her older brothers and sisters have all been gone for several years, except for Minnie, her sister-in-law. The peony bushes tend to fall over when they're heavy with flowers in the spring. That's why Russell was tying them up. Libby's daughter, Anna, and her family will be driving back from Texas soon. Libby's grandson, Harold, arrived home this week, but he has not been up the block to see his grandmother yet. May 28th, 1946. Walter and Harold were here to get the spade. Truck stuck out north of town. I ironed. My feet hurt. Mary R. and Maud were here. I bought eggs at 29 cents. The booster class met at Lottie's. Lodge night. I didn't go either. Grandsons Walter and Harold Wade showed up at Grandma Libby's to borrow a tool. They needed the spade to get themselves dug out. May 29th, 1946. Getting cloudy again. Haven't heard any more from Anna. Mr. Cray called up. Lena was here in the PM. Russell and George Moore took flags to the cemetery. Beth and Esther Mall were here in the evening. Anna, the only good picture I've got of Anna is this one right here. She's their younger daughter. Libby's this one, and that's Wayne, and that's Anna in this picture. And that's old Grandpa Claypool and Henry and Daisy and Rosie over there. Anna and Richard Cray are supposed to be traveling from Texas. Richard's father, Mr. Cray from Wellman, telephoned over to Libby's house to see if she knows anything about their whereabouts. It is almost Memorial Day. And Beth Mall Holmes is Libby's niece. She's the young girl in this picture. This is her parents. This is Libby's sister, Sarah Myrtle Mall, and her husband, John Josiah Mall. And these are older brothers and sisters in this along here. May 30th, 1946, Memorial Day. Cloudy and threatening rain. Hattie told me that Glenn Garringer and Maymie Burkett were married yesterday. Went to the cemetery with Verdi and Bernice. Russell took Warren and Lena and Dale Bells to Cedar Rapids to the races. My aunt and uncle, Glenn and Maymie Garringer, were married this week. More about that in a minute. Libby likely went to the North English Cemetery this time with her friend, Verdi Mahana McKinstry, and Verdi's daughter-in-law, Bernice McKinstry. Russell often drove others in his new car. This time his brother, Warren or Mike Wade, and his wife Lena, and Dale and Harriet Bell all went to Cedar Rapids to the races. May 31st, 1946. Went down to stay with Belva and the baby while Jenny went to the sale at the ranch. Glennon Miller and Ethel Blanche Miller came up here a while. Blanche took my picture. Nice today. Had a letter from Anna. They will start today or tomorrow. There was a horse sale out at the ranch, which was Maple Crest Ranch, south of town. I found an article about the sale, and we'll talk more about this big horse sale next week. Anna and her family have not left Texas yet. That is the end of the diary portion of the program for the week. A little history on my aunt and uncle, Glenn and Maymie Garringer, who were married this week in 1946. There's Maymie, and there's Glenn. Glenn was operating the service station uptown with my grandfather, John Garringer, in 1946. Glenn and Mamie's family lived in several places over the years, including Iowa City, where Glenn was a cook in nice restaurants, and in Florida, where he once cooked breakfast for President Johnson. We called Glenn Uncle Spark, and when they came back to Iowa in the late 1960s, Glenn operated Uncle Spark's English Valley's Cafe in the restaurant on the west side of Main Street that used to belong to the Cox family. Dan Besh from the History Center board remembers that Uncle Spark brought donuts to North English, as he had a machine that dunked donuts in grease and cooked them. My brother Lou Garringer worked in the cafe for Spark as a teenager. Glenn later drove a taxi in Iowa City, and after he passed, Mamie married Dean Lures, a farmer from Washington, Iowa. Glenn and Mamie had seven children, sons Dale, Larry, Joe, and John David, who were all in the service. The oldest three served in Vietnam. Daughter Teresa and two younger sons, Glenn Jr. and Ben. And now our feature story today is on Carl Hogendorn. Carl Hogendorn was a longtime owner and publisher of the North English newspaper. After he retired, he continued to write a column called Main Street Musings about the happenings in town. Carl was super knowledgeable about the history and families of the area, but Carl was not a native of North English. He was originally from Colfax, Iowa. His wife, Bertilla, was from the Williamsburg area and worked alongside him in the newspaper business and helped raise their 10 children. And here's a picture of the Hogendorn family. In the back is Denise, Marcia, David or Harwood, Leslie, and in the front is Joe Ray, Carl holding April, and then Honor, Bertilla holding Lenny, and Terry with Kristen, or Chris. Carl was born December 24th, 1909 at Colfax, Iowa. He married Bertilla Driscoll in 1936 in Williamsburg. He worked at newspapers in Strawberry Point, Colfax, Grundy Center, and Wellsburg before coming to North English in 1933 and starting his work at the newspaper. He became owner of the North English Record in 1955. In 1946, he helped organize the Press Columnists of Iowa and served as its first president. He was named Master Editor Publisher in 1962 by the then Iowa Press Association. He passed away December 7th, 1986. There are pictures that I just love of Carl in the History Center. There's this one. This is a especially good one. It's standing right in the front of the North English Record office. And then this one here. My favorite story about Carl was one time when he called up to my parents' house after the death of my mom's uncle, Alva Keller, a single man who lived in Montezuma, Iowa. Carl was calling to get information for the obituary to put in the newspaper. However, I didn't furnish him with any new information. He already knew everything he intended to write, so he was only calling as a formality. Carl was a walking encyclopedia about the English Valleys area, and he stayed in touch with people all over the country and wrote about them in his column. My listeners have probably noticed that when I'm trying to verify information, I cross-check with the North English Record. No doubt he and Lib Wade exchanged information often. One of the areas he did research on was the town of Carter, Iowa, which was the northeast of town. We will talk more about that in the future. Carl and Bertilla were fine human beings. Their daughter April summed it up best in a recent post. Inheritance is not just money. Sometimes your father's good reputation is enough, and wherever you go, you are told that your father was one of the best people. I was left with plenty of inheritance by both of my parents in the form of example, love, faith, civic duty, stewardship, and justice. And as I promised last week, here are some pictures from the grocery store. Marilyn Van Fleet created this photograph book, and there's the picture of it in front of it. It's about the building of the new grocery store. It's available for you to look at here at the History Center. Some of the people who worked at the grocery store in the History Center building were Bob Buckner. There's a good picture of Bob right there. Marilyn Van Fleet, the person that did the book. There's Marilyn there. So hold it to the right picture in case everybody doesn't know which one I'm talking about. Dennis Young. Dan Best says Dennis worked at every grocery store in North English. There's Dennis there. And of course, Eldon and Opal Berkram. They're in this picture here. This is from the North English history book. And at the bottom is Leroy Claypool from South English, the first husband of Reva Gilchrist Claypool Wyant. Correspondence, etc. for February 1st, 2025. Darcy Brown Kane writes, "Thank you, Jackie. Keep up your passion for history." Jeannie Gardner-Lentz from Williamsburg writes, "You are doing North English proud, Jackie. Atta girl." We are looking for English Valley High School annuals from the 1940s. We know there's a 1942 version and a 1949 version. Does anyone know of any other existence of any other annuals from the 1940s? Also, if you have pictures you would like to share of anyone we have featured or anyone from any upcoming program, please let me know. My friend Susie Allison Lundberg from Iowa City writes, "You do an incredible job taking people down memory lane, Jackie. A huge shout out for your research, your dedication, and hard work in your presentation." Mark Claypool from Sigourney writes, "Jackie, the trip this week was so memorable, especially the centennial photo. Not only seeing my granddad, but so many other gentlemen that I knew as a young man. This is always a highlight of my Saturdays." Chris Cobb Galligan from Cedar Rapids writes, "Your blogs bring back so many names from my youth. We moved from North English in 1960, and so many of my relatives live there. A lot remain. We still returned often to see my aunt and uncle Glenn and Hazel Cobb until their passing. I would bring my parents Milo and Nellie Van D. Cobb to Van D. reunions for many years. Now, much of my contact with relatives is via Facebook. I love some of our visits to the History Center, like when Uncle Glenn received the Quilt of Valor, and then for their memorials. North English is lucky to have such a facility and have it be so active." Pam Kavanaugh Shield from Cedar Rapids, Iowa writes, "Thanks again for your informative broadcast, Jackie. Vance and Jenny Hall and I are related to the Hohenshells. My grandparents were Charlie and Nida Hohenschel, and my mom was Ruby Hohenschel Kavanaugh. I wasn't very old, but I remember the excitement of the centennial. Different memories come flooding back from your stories each week, so look forward to them." Barb Best Wright from Waukee says, "My first job interview out of college was at Odia Finance Company in downtown Des Moines. This was in 1983. I was interviewing with then President Marvin Selden, who was state comptroller at one time. Anyway, he was asking me about going to college, my major, etc. And then he said, 'Where did you grow up?' I said, 'North English, Iowa.' He immediately said, 'Home of Mace Brown.' I said, 'Wow, you know your Iowa baseball history.' I'd never heard of Mace Brown. I was a 19-year-old kid. He said, 'When can you start?' So I guess you can say Mace Brown got me my first job out of college. Next week's feature will be on Mace Brown." Alice Floring Stramer from Watkins commented regarding Hinkletown, "Jackie, another fine lesson on North English history. My dad's cousin would come from Santa Clara, California to visit with Dave Jackson regarding the history of Hinkletown. Eugene or Jim Floring would spend hours at the English Valley History Center, almost to being obsessed with the memories of his childhood there. My dad, Harold or Riley Floring, his parents and siblings cared for the children of Leo and Blanche Weimer Floring after they succumbed to tuberculosis. Jim was buried along with his family in the North English Cemetery on the northwest edge of the cemetery. I believe they may have gone to Hickory Ridge School." Marcia Wade Vinson from Helena, Illinois writes, "Jim Floring was also a good friend of my dad's, a relative, I believe, as my grandma was a Weimer. So many wonderful memories of Hinkletown for me. Yesterday, on my Iowa visit, I listened to your podcast to and from. 6 hours of emotion and fond memories. I knew so many as a child and then worked at the English Valley Nursing Care Center at age 14. I knew so many more, Minnie Warner and so many of my friends as grandparents and then aunts and uncles. So many knew my relatives. North English will always be my home. Signed, Homesick in Illinois. Thank you, Jackie, and all your crew, History Center people. Hoping to actually visit sometime." Shirley Claypool Cochran from Mountain Home, Arkansas writes, "Hi, Jackie, I've been thinking about you. Hope all is well. It's so much fun to see you on TV every weekend. Yep, we put you on the big screen now that you're on YouTube. I got kind of behind over the holidays, but I'm finally caught up again. I so appreciate that you are keep it going and that you have made it available for all of us, especially that it's out there and we can go back and review things that we missed or have a special interest in. Other members of my family are starting to take an interest. Keep up the good work. Looking forward to your visit this spring. Yes, fans, I will be off on a big adventure this spring. More details to come soon. I need to get my taxes done first. Andy Weber of Sigourney writes, once again, thank you so much for everything you've done for each week's broadcast. I enjoy it very much. Keep up the amazing work. April Hogendorn Rauner from Iowa City writes, I appreciate you letting people know via Facebook what you've been doing to keep North English pride alive and well. All of us who came from large Catholic families don't have much money, but we're wealthy in community friends. What a great place to grow up. Thank you so much for the podcast. My cousin Buck Garringer, who attends Watcher Methodist Church with me, reminded me that there are 3 different pioneer women who lived east of town. They are Bertha Ballard, Armilla Ballard, and Bertha Welch. Bertha Ballard, who we spotlighted last week, was out in the Inkletown area and the mother of 11 children. She lived from 1880 to 1970. One of Bertha Ballard's sister-in-laws was Armilla Ballard, who lived at Yankee Point, north and east of North English, in the big square house that I usually refer to as Kathy Farrell Cockerham's house to the modern folks, but Travis and Amanda Clubb own it now. Armilla Ballard was married to Charlie Ballard, who was a brother of John Newton Ballard Jr., Bertha Ballard's husband. Armilla was the mother of Grace Ballard Wilhite and of Leroy Ballard. In this picture, she's seen with her parents. This is Lou Claypool Pettibone and Oscar Leroy Carter Pettibone, or OLC Pettibone, her dad. And this is Armilla, and that's her brother, Glenn. Armilla was the mother of Grace Ballard Wilhite and of Leroy Ballard, and Grace was the mother of my listener from Winsburg, Sharon Wilhite Hagen, a graduate of English Valleys High School. Armilla was the child of OCL and Lou Carter, and her brother Glenn Pettibone, who lived with his wife Cora McCombs Pettibone in the stucco house at the corner of East Oak Street and Boland Avenue in the 1960s. Yankee Point Church and Yankee Point School were on Charlie and Armilla Ballard's land. I noticed on the land transfers to Travis and Amanda Clubb, it clearly shows where the Yankee Point Church was located. Armilla Ballard lived from 1886 to 1957. Another woman from that time period was Bertha Welch. She lived just west of Armilla Ballard in a house that was near the modern cement paved Yankee Point Bridge on the English River. Her house is gone now, and David Axmere owns that ground. Bertha was the daughter of Nellie Ballard Welch and her husband Eugene Welch. Nellie was a sister to John Newton Ballard Jr. and Charles or Charlie Ballard. So Bertha Welch was a niece by marriage to Bertha Ballard and also to Armilla Ballard. Bertha Welch lived from 1903 to 1992. I don't have a picture of Bertha Welch. Her nephew, Keith Garringer, stayed in the Welch home with his grandfather, Eugene Welch, and his Aunt Bertha Welch after his mother, Ada Welch Garringer, died at a very young age. His brother, Orville Garringer, went with his grandmother, Tracy Garringer, who was later married to Frank Wallace. Bertha Welch was like a mother to Keith Garringer. Leroy Ballard, who had some learning disabilities, lived with his cousin Bertha Welch after his mother, Armilla Ballard, passed away. And I've got a picture of the Ballard family, and this is it right here. And the 3 on the top, right here is John Newton Ballard Jr. that was married to Bertha. The sister, Nettie Ballard Welch, wife of Eugene Welch and mother of Bertha Welch. And then this one here is Charlie Ballard that was married to Armilla Pettibone Ballard. And we'll revisit that Ballard picture later because there's many more descendants from that Ballard family around here. You might remember last week we talked about the Cuba pits or the ponds, Cuba ponds between North English and South English. The Keokuk County Historical Society had a picture taken out at Cuba of the Sephoric family standing near the water tower. And this is it. It was on, if you're on Keokuk County History site, it was on there this week. Brian Lee from Webster commented, "What I remember what Dr. Ken Harris said, Cuba was a water stop for steam engines. Cuba Pits was recreated by the railroad to build up the rail line above the flood stage. All was done with horsepower. Very popular for the locals to swim and fish and ice skate." And Wayne Bowman also commented on there and said, "I remember a story about how the Cuba Pits were formed. When the railroad was constructed, coal was burnt to produce coal clinkers. The clinkers were used as ballast for the railroad bed. The pits were dug and the dirt was used to raise the rails higher. The pits were then used to burn coal to produce the clinkers. The water tower was located there to fill the steam train with water before it started up the very long, gradual uphill grade that went to the west from the Cuba Pit area. The railroad track passed through the middle of the Burdett Bowman farm. I have fond memories of hearing the steam trains passing by in the night. Such a beautiful, powerful sound." Our condolences this week to the family of Dean Evans, who passed away this week. Dean graduated from North English High School in 1954. While in high school, Dean met the love of his life, Zona Downing, and they were united in marriage. His children were Larry, Cheryl, Carmen, and Lyle. And we also have this nice picture from 1954. And this one up here in the middle is Dean. We have set up a channel on YouTube where the podcast can be viewed, and that's easier than hunting on my Facebook page for the broadcast. So far, we've had over 500 views on YouTube. They are archived by date of broadcast. We invite you to subscribe, like, share, and tell your friends. Subscribing to YouTube is free. We also will continue on Facebook each week. Funding for the History Center comes from the Iowa County 100 Plus Who Care and the Iowa County Community Foundation. However, we welcome your donations to keep the heat and lights on. Please send donations to the English Valley's History Center, P.O. Box 70, North English, Iowa 52316. Also, we'll have another reunion at Bryant's in Williamsburg. If you can get a hold of Alice Stramer or Linda Carter if you're interested in attending those lunches. Scott and Bonnie Romine are working on a set of programs for 2025. Scott Romine has posted the schedule of the alumni reunion at the History Center during North English Fun Days on Saturday, July 26th. There's a flyer about all that. If you get on the graduates page, you can see it. We're also interested in learning about historical English Valley's items that you might wish to donate to the History Center. Please contact Dave Jackson, Scott Romine, or any board member to donate. We'll see you next week.
And that's a wrap.